Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be tooling up our belt pattern. This one's actually numbered 2-22, one of the few belt patterns we numbered. But anyways, I'm going to tool this up start to finish with you. And this video is being made especially for my friend Bob Baker. Thank you for being such a light in the leather life community. We appreciate you. It was great seeing you down in Waco this year at the leather show. And I know you got this pattern and asked me if we had a video on it, and I didn't have a video on it. So I'm making this video. I hope you enjoy tooling up this pattern, have fun with it, and look forward to seeing you at the next show. Let's jump in and get started. Starting out by cutting this pattern in, I want to point out just a couple things as I'm getting down to the last cuts here. Is one, I'm not connecting any of those cuts. So this is just like in any pattern. I'm not wanting to connect those. I just want to have that full integrity of the leather still holding together. We will bevel those together to where they look like they're cut together, but we're going to still have all that leather holding together so we don't wind up with a point that lifts up over time at all. So as we get these last few cuts here, I do want to make sure we're making nice cuts that are going to last and hold up. Now, any of these cuts that end within the vine work, I mean, this comes and it kind of disappears, those are the ones where we're really fading out. So to fade that, I'm simply loosening pressure as I pull that cut. Pull that cut, the pressure releases, that cut fades out. I want to make sure that I'm keeping my angle of my knife consistent. So that angle stays consistent and I just lighten pressure off of that. I don't tip that knife as we finish that cut. Make sure to not get lazy in those cuts. Finish that cut all the way. Okay, now this one, I've saved this cut because it comes all the way around here. I could get and try to reach all the way around there, but that can be tough if you have a full belt here. So I'm going to start at the top of this cut, pull that around, and then come back in there, pull that cut the other way. Now I'm able to get that smooth cut all the way around there without having to try to spin that belt all the way around. Now if we are doing a full belt, on your pattern there's these little marks. There's a hash mark right here and one right there. So if we were transferring this pattern, I would transfer this and I would transfer that little mark there. Then as I move my pattern up, I would put this mark right on that one that transferred, and that will allow this pattern to repeat real smooth across there. Now let's go to beveling this in. First thing I'm going to do is I like to bevel my borders in. That gives a nice crisp look on those borders, making sure I don't have anything else that accidentally runs into that border at all. Remember, as we're beveling, every time I tap that tool, it's picking up and barely moving over. And then I'm going to speed up as we go, as I start getting comfortable and working that coordination between left and right hand. That's where the speed picks up. But even as I'm going faster, every time I hit that tool, my bevel's moving. A lot of times when we're learning something, we're trying to emulate, right? You try to just create what you're seeing, what you're hearing. And the problem that I see people run into is they are trying to emulate, trying to replicate that sound that they hear. Just hitting that a bunch of times real fast isn't gonna make those nice smooth bevel lines. Because a lot of times when I see people do that, what they don't have is both hands working together. So they're hitting that tool really fast, but they're not moving it consistently as they go. So they might hit 3 or 4 times in one spot on that tool and get really deep, and then it'll jump and they'll hit it further down the line, and that's when you start getting those really choppy looking bevels. Like, have you ever had to deal with that choppy, chattery look in your bevels. If you have, put it in the comments. And this is going to be encouraging to everybody else. I know me personally, I had that too. I had choppy, chattery looking bevels when I was learning, and it's just something we've all had to overcome. So encourage somebody else that's coming along that might be just starting tooling and feel like they're the only one that's had to deal with that. Let them know in the comments here, like, hey, you're not alone. I fought with choppy bevel lines too. So again, if you're new to tooling, if you're just getting this stuff figured out and frustrated or feeling like, man, I'm no good at this, like, check out the comments. People are going to encourage you that you are not the only one. Like, keep with it, keep working at it, and it will come. But anytime we're practicing, we got to make sure we know what we're practicing. But not just knowing how to make those bevel lines, but the other big thing is where to make them. So on your pattern, if you have this pattern, we want to check out where the backgrounds are. So the shaded spots in your pattern, those are the backgrounds. And when you transfer your pattern, you can do just like I'm doing here, put little dots in those backgrounds. And what that's going to help do is help it start to look a little more clear for you. Now, when I'm beveling, what is it that we're doing? We're pushing leather down and pushing leather away. So when I push leather away like this, I'm pushing that shadow away from me, the flat side of my bevels towards me. And by me pushing that down and putting a shadow on this vine, which tells me this one is up higher, right? And we push down things that are further back. Now, instead of having to go through and try to figure out what's on top of everything and how that works, we're going to make it real simple for you. If we're pushing back things that are further back, what is the furthest back thing in any pattern? It's going to be the backgrounds, right? The background is the furthest thing back in anything. If we're wanting this floral work to stand on top, those backgrounds are the furthest back. So any line that's touching a background spot, we're just going to bevel towards that background. So this line here on this flower petal is touching a background spot right here. So I need to turn that to where the flat part of the bevel's towards me so I can see, but I'm going to bevel towards that background spot. But once I've started on that line, I continue on it. I don't just stop because it's at the end of that background. I continue on that line. I'm not going to switch sides of that line. So we just continue on until that line ends, or in this case, intersects with that border there. Now this line here, it's touching that background spot. Just this little spot, but it's touching it. So I'm going to bevel towards there. Follow that around that direction. Follow this around here. This one's touching that background spot. So we're going to go around here. Now that little rule is going to get you through the majority of most of your patterns. Now, what are the exceptions to that rule? Well, sometimes a line doesn't touch a background. Again, a lot of times they do, but sometimes they don't. And in this pattern, there's a few lines that don't touch a background. So we're going to address that and talk about how we're going to figure that out. So this flower, there's 3 lines here that aren't touching a background. So once we've gone through and done all the ones that are touching backgrounds, now we got to look and say, okay, well, what is this line? What is this line? Where are those coming from? We have to think, if this is a flower here, which petal's on top of the other one? Well, this petal here is on top of that one. We figured that out by this line. So this is the other side of that pedal here, right? So that's got to be on top of that one. So we're going to bevel towards that. Okay, so that shading's going out over top of this pedal. So this is our dominant pedal, the one that's on top. It's pushing down this one, pushing down this one. Now these two are pushing down this one. So we're going to bevel out towards that one. Bevel out towards that one. And just think about it, if we're looking at this pedal, this line right here, that wouldn't be part of this pedal, it's got to be this pedal. So this one's got to be on top of that one. Okay, but those, I believe, are only lines in this pattern that don't touch a background, are the ones on the flower here. Now this flower here, same thing. We're going to look, this one's touching a background. The nice thing about this pattern is both of these flowers are set up and designed the same way. So once you have it figured out, you're going to be able to stay consistent and get both of them right. Again, this one up here is touching a background, so I can get that beveled. But now we run into the same three lines here. Again, this flower is on top of that vine work, right? So we can bevel this one out. This one's on top of here, so we can bevel that one. And this pedal is on top of this one, so we can bevel towards it. Around this swirl here. Same thing, we're just following that rule, which line's touching the background. Now the next question that I tend to get is, well, which lines should I bevel first? And again, you can get real complicated, thinking, well, we got to bevel our background or our foreground and our layering and what's on top of what, which makes sense, I get it. Because what they try to avoid, if somebody's telling you to do that, trying to avoid, if I run into something else that's on top, see that kind of little squish that it gives right there into that pedal? We don't want that. It's easy enough if I have to run here. I can just turn that bevel and clean that up right there. So I don't worry about which one I bevel first or last. They all need beveled. So I just go to beveling them. And then if I need to clean something up, I can turn that bevel and clean it up. Just like that. Because to me, that is a lot better and more efficient on my time, because I can work down this belt this direction and get all the lines that I can reach from this side. Now what do I mean when I say reach? I mean that I'm wanting to bevel all the time where I can see that, that flat side of my bevel in the line. So I can see that in this line. Makes it to where I know that I'm not jumping out of that line or off of that line. So I can reach that line from this side. Now this other line, it's touching this background, so I need to actually bevel it this direction. But I can't see where my bevel is in that line from here. It's kind of hidden to me. So I run the risk of beveling over top of a line that I don't want to bevel over top of. So that one I consider that I can't reach it from this side. I'm going to have to turn this belt around to hit that line. So instead of me wanting to hit these in a certain order and have to turn my project around a whole lot of times and really think through my layering, all I'm going to do is work on my lines that are anything touching a background, or a bevel towards the background. And then I work down my project everywhere I can reach from the side I'm on. Then I'll turn that project one time around here. And now I can go back and get the ones that I can reach from this side. Everywhere we faded those lines when we cut them, these lines that end within the vine work, I'm going to fade those with my bevel as well. And again, just by lightening the pressure that I'm tapping with as I move along there, that will fade that line out. Now, which bevels to use, that's another big question. A lot of times in videos I'll show our beginner kit, or just our beginner bevels. This one I happen to grab my Berry King, so this is not out of our beginner kit. This is the Berry King bevel that I'm using right now. This is the XX Steep checkered bevel. Size is a number 2 for Berry King. But I would do the same beveling with the large bevel out of our beginner's kit. I bevel all those same lines there with that bevel. I got one of those sitting here. So you can see this is the large bevel out of our beginner's kit here, nice crisp, and about the same width as that number 2 bevel from Berry. Now, I also have the small bevel from that kit. That'll work really well to size down on the inside of this curve here too. So this is the small bevel from our beginner's kit. That fits really nice on the inside of that circle. So I can work that bevel all the way around there on the inside without getting real choppy on my bevel line there. If you have a bevel that's too big for the area you're trying to bevel, you'll wind up beveling in places that you don't want to bevel, and it'll reach out and block that off. So you got to be careful, make sure you have the right size of bevel there. So now that we have that beveled, 2 things we're going to do that I kind of jump ahead out of my order here, but it's going to help make things show up a lot better for you. We're going to start with a flower center in there. We're just going to do a plain center right here. Drop that right in our centers so we see right where that's at. And we'll come back to do a little bit more on that flower center later on. The other thing that we're going to drop in here and do is our backgrounds. So all those backgrounds we put little dots in, we're going to come in. I'm just going to use a matte backgrounder here. It's a very forgiving background tool. As you can see, we can overlap that tool as we go. Not a problem. The main thing is that we're filling the entire background area. So we talk about on the swivel knife, like don't get lazy and tip that knife at the end of your cut. Make sure we keep that straight up and down. While in the backgrounding, don't get lazy on your background. Make sure we get it all the way to the edges, all the way down in those bevel lines. That's going to give that nice crisp look to our backgrounds. If we're just up on the top of that kind of pillowed area and doesn't get down into the bevel lines, it's not as crisp as if we get all the way down in there. So make sure to finish that out and get all the way down in there. You can use whatever background tools you want in this pattern. Obviously, you can, if you want to run your bar grounder, or if you have a pebble backgrounder, any of those will work. And just getting those backgrounds pushed down. The reason I'm kind of having you do that right now is it's going to help things stand out, and you're going to see them a lot better before we go doing our shading. And I got a couple more background spots to hit here, and then that's exactly what we're going to jump to is our shading on here. Now, depending how well your leather's cased up and the environment, it may dry out on you a little bit. So in here, I'm gonna just put another light coat of water over this, so that way I don't have to recase this anytime after I start my shading. Again, if I needed to, not a problem, but I think I can get it all now because the rest of these tools go pretty darn quick. So my go-to tool for shading is going to be my vertical line thumbprint. I like this tool for shading because I can run it a little bit further. When I do this, let's start on our sticker vines. So these little vines that shoot off to the side. I'm going to tip that tool, get that dark shadow towards our shorter rounded line on our petals, and we create that little highlighted ridge out there on the edge. By having that tool tipped, I can get that dark burnish, that dark coloring right at the edge of that petal. Then you can see it kind of creates this hard line on the back. To smooth that out, once I get this here, now I can flatten that tool a little bit. Now I'm hitting more with the center of that tool, and real lightly I can work along there and take that hard line out, so that way that shading just fades down the vine. Now, one thing to notice on this tool is I squeeze this tool pretty hard. I like to have good control over it so I can kind of draw that line, that highlighted ridge. I'm just looking at that and drawing that around here as I go. But I'm squeezing the tool hard, but I do have to hold it up above the leather. I'm not dragging it through there. So you can see every time I hit that tool, it does come up out of the leather to be able to move. Try to kind of overemphasize that here on this one. So it comes back up. So I'm just almost hovering right above the surface of that leather. All right, now I didn't put any shading in this down here. That's actually my flower stem running into that petal. Same thing here, that one runs into that petal. So I don't have any shading there. On our swirl here, this outside, the big part of the swirl, no shading. But on the inside of that, we're gonna tip this tool, kind of mash the crap out of it in there. Get that down there. Working that around. And that's going to start showing that bottom side of that swirl because it's rolled underneath itself there. So that's why we put the good mash on it there. Now on this leaf, I'm going to use this tool as a leaf liner. So I'm going to hold it at an angle, kind of a 45-degree angle going out from that stem. And we'll work that around here. Again, tipping that so I just get a little bit of shading off of that leaf stem there. Rotating that tool as we're coming around. See, it puts that little bit of shading off of there, that little shadow. We'll do it off of the inside as well. Now we're going to come, keeping that tipped, a little bit of shading in those ridges, right, in the rounded kind of parts out there on those ridges. We're putting that shading in, drawing that back down towards the base of this leaf here. That's kind of our aiming point in those leaves is the base of that. Down on our sticker vines, we're just pulling that shading back down the vine where it was growing from. Now here, watch this. We have a straight line cut here on the end of this, but I'm going to create ridges in this side of the petal just by how hard I'm hitting. I hit down, I lighten up. Hit down, lighten up. Hit down, lighten up. So we created ridges from that, just like this. We created the look of those as they're coming up out of that border there. All right, now we'll get into the flowers. All of our shading is pulling back towards that center. So again, creating a little ridge here by hitting down, lightening up. Get out towards there, and then a rounded. Anytime we have that rounded curve on that petal, that outside curve, that's where the dark shading's going, and when it's concave, it's where we lighten up. So right here on this petal, we're rounded. My shading's pointed back towards that flower center. I lighten up at the concave spot, and then darken back up. Rotate this around, same thing, get a little bit of shading here, creating those ridges, just with lightening up and getting heavier there. Beveling and shading, those two tools take the majority of the time when you're tooling. The rest of them, the rest of your detail tools go really, really fast in comparison to the beveling and the shading. So I always feel like once you get started on a pattern, the further you go, or the further you get, the faster it goes, which is kind of encouraging to me all the time, especially on a bigger pattern, or if you're doing this pattern on a full belt. It might seem like it takes you a while when you get down that belt the whole way beveling, and then it takes you a while to get down the whole thing shading, but the shading doesn't take quite as long as the beveling. And that's, now once we have our shading done, these detail tools don't take near as long as that does. So while I still have this tool in my hand, whatever tool you're shading with, you're going to put a little shading around the outside of that flower center. So that tool tipped, you see I have shading that's pushing back into the flower petals on here. This is just going to really help give a more realistic look on these centers. Probably even more so than making them realistic, we're just going to make them pop a little bit. That's the idea. Even just with the shading around there, you can see the difference from this one to this one where it's just stamped in there. And then I'll show you each step along the way here, kind of in a comparison on these two flower centers. We'll get the shading done on this one, and then we're going to go back to a tool that we had already used, which most times I don't like doing, but in this case I do. So we're going to put that shader back, so we're done with that, but I'm going to reach back and get my bevel again. And now I'm going to crisp up these flower centers by continuing that bevel and rebeveling the edge of those petals right back down to that flower center. Again, let's look at the difference between this one that we just crisped up and that one that we didn't. Kind of a big difference in there. But we're not quite done with them yet, because once we crisp those up, I'm going to go back in whatever flower center you used originally. Let's grab that same tool again. So in this case, it was this plain center that I had. And we're going to just sharpen that center stamp up there. And we'll sharpen this one up too. You can always do different things with your tools. You don't have to just settle for the center that you have, because we can touch those up. So we have our center there, that plain center. I'm going to take my seeder, a little seed tool, and let's put a little seed right in the middle of that. That just changed the look of that flower center too. So with that same seeder, I'm going to come in right at the base of those flower stems there and put a little seed in. Now we're into all the detail tools. After we have that seed, we're going to come back with a mule's foot, kind of a V-shaped tool here. We're going to point that V down the stem, have it opened up to where it's like it's holding that seed, following the curve of that stem. You can see I just stack those in there. So I have this tool tipped a little bit. Keep it tipped, and I'm hitting lighter and lighter each time, so we have that fade on there. Then we're going to go to a tool called a veiner. It's kind of a little semi-rounded tool here. And we'll start with how this tool's kind of designed to be the vein in leaves, right? That's why it's called a veiner. So that tool tipped a little bit. We're going to come up the side of that leaf stem. And I'm going to come to the other side and mirror those around there. Again, kind of looking at my angle, angling out at that 45-ish degree off of that. Maybe we're not a little bit shallower there, but matching that on either side. Now down my flower stems, we want these to look a little different than the other vines, so we'll put a little veiner on those just to add a little texture. Put some on the inside of this one here too. And now on this swirl, we're going to turn this around here where I can put it on the outside edge. My curve is going the same way as the curve of that swirl. I'm going to tip it to the side here. I'm going to start real light, and then I'm going to get a little heavier as we go, starting to flatten that tool out a little bit more. Notice I'm rotating as we go, so I want the impression pointing back towards the center of that swirl. It's kind of my aiming point. Lightening up as we come around and tuck under that border. And then I can fade off again as I come out towards the tip there. Gives that extra texture there. Now the last step, this is my favorite one. This is our decorative cuts. I think I'd pulled the first few cuts with my nice leather wrangler's knife. I'll show you the decorative cuts we'll do that with our beginner knife, just out of the beginner kit here, to show that it's not about which knife you have. It's just about getting comfortable with that and being used to making those cuts. So we're just going to put a couple little rounded cuts out on this guy. All these sticker vines, we're going to come with a short cut around the shorter rounded line, and then a longer cut down here. And again, they're coming close at that point, but they're not actually touching. Okay. In our flowers, all those cuts we want pulling back towards the flower center. And as I do that, I'm starting those cuts deep, fading them off as we go, and bringing them closer together so they taper together as they come towards that center. That's going to help give the depth in that petal as that pedal's pulling out away from our flower center. We always want to make sure we have curve in our cuts. A straight line isn't going to add much flow, and that's what we're wanting to add with these decorative cuts, is some flow and depth to our patterns. So on this swirl, I'm going to come around here, stacking a few of those around that outside edge, and now I'm going to bring one longer one all the way around, more around the center of that swirl there. It just helps pull your eye around there and show that flow. Now, if you don't have this pattern yet but are interested in it, we will link that up down below as well. Again, just kind of a fun, faster tooling pattern, great for beginners because it's big and open, so it has a lot of the flow and the professional look that you want in your pattern, but it's going to match up with your skill sets as you're learning and let you build those skills up as you're building professional looking belts here. So we'll link those up below. Also a link to that Leather Life community. If you're not in there yet, love to see you in there. Hang out with great people like Bob, who I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Love to have you in there and love to see the work that you're doing. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your leathercraft journey. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.